The Grand Hall of the Galactic Citadel was constructed to project absolute, unyielding authority. Its vaulted ceilings reached 300 meters into the artificial atmosphere, lined with shimmering bioluminescent crystals that cast a cool, pristine light over the thousands of planetary delegations assembled below. For over 6 centuries, this majestic chamber had managed interstellar commerce, settled complex border disputes, and enforced a delicate peace among 7,000 sapient species. High Ambassador Vale of the Ivari Union stood at the elevated central podium, his iridescent blue feathers rustling softly as he reviewed routine trade tariffs from the Outer Rim. Vale was an ancient creature, having served over 3 centuries in the High Diplomatic Corps, and he prided himself on his unshakable composure. That composure shattered the moment his secondary communication pad began to flash a violent, high-priority crimson. Vale paused his address, placing his slender, 4-fingered hand over the sensor grid to decrypt the incoming transmission. It was a top-tier flash report from the Deep Space Monitoring Station near Sector 9, a traditionally lawless region dominated by rogue warlords and mercenary cartels. As the decrypted text materialized on his private optic visor, Vale's feathers flattened completely flush against his skin. His primary heart missed a beat, his dark eyes widening in sheer disbelief as his beak parted slightly without uttering a sound. "Ambassador Vale," whispered his chief attaché, a young Tellarite named Kale, stepping up to the podium. "Is there a sudden update on the Outer Rim tariff dispute?" Vale slowly turned his head toward the young attaché, his expression filled with a cold, pale dread that Kale had never seen on the old diplomat's face before. "Kale, issue an immediate emergency lockdown of the council chamber. Notify all high commissioners that a Tier 1 crisis is underway." Kale blinked, thoroughly startled by the sudden, dramatic shift in tone. "Sir, what could possibly have occurred in Sector 9 to warrant a full chamber lockdown?" "Warlord Gorath of the Vorik Syndicate has just executed a boarding action on a civilian human vessel operating near the fringe colony of New Horizon," Vale said, his voice barely more than a dry rasp. The young Tellarite let out a soft breath, looking almost relieved by the explanation. "A pirate raid? Sir, the humans will file a formal claim with the Trade Bureau, and the Syndicate will attempt to demand ransom for the cargo. It is an unfortunate inconvenience, but surely it is hardly a crisis for the High Assembly." "He did not take the cargo, Kale," Vale interrupted, grabbing the young attaché by his shoulder with a tight, trembling grip. "Gorath boarded the transport's educational module. He took 42 human children hostage. He intends to use them as political leverage to force the United Earth Fleet to abandon their mining claims in Sector 9. The color drained instantly from Kale's face, his posture collapsing as he staggered back half a step with shallow, rapid breaths. He took human offspring? Is he completely insane? He is a local warlord who has spent his entire life fighting other regional warlords, Vale said, turning back toward the Grand Assembly with a look of profound horror. He thinks in terms of traditional military tactics, ransom economics, and territorial posturing. He does not understand what he has just done. Vale stepped up to the main broadcast microphone, overriding every active speaker in the immense chamber with a single master key. A loud, piercing chime echoed off the vaulted crystal ceilings, instantly silencing the murmurs of 3,000 planetary delegates. "Members of the Galactic Assembly," Vale declared, his voice trembling through the audio array. "Emergency Directive 7 is now in effect across all sectors. As of 15 minutes ago, the Vorik Syndicate captured 42 human children and holds them inside the Iron Stronghold on planet Vorik Prime." A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the immense hall. Delegates from predatory empires, peaceful trading guilds, and ancient industrial cartels alike stood up from their benches in absolute shock. "Are the Vorik completely out of their minds?" shouted Delegate Kraz of the Krellian Imperium, his 4 eyes wide with unadulterated fear as he slammed his claws onto his desk. "They took their young? Do they have any concept of what humanity's biological programming does when their offspring are threatened? They believe they hold an insurmountable bargaining chip, Bale stated somberly, holding his hands up to maintain order. They believe the human military will come to the negotiating table to draft a treaty. They will not negotiate, screamed a representative from the Riken Dominion, a martial species that had fought a devastating war against Earth 50 years prior. When our fleet accidentally damaged a human transport carrying families during the siege of Solis, humanity did not send diplomats or legal demands. They dismantled 3 of our prime strike fleets in 48 hours. Humans do not calculate territory or profit when you touch their children. They fight until the threat ceases to exist. Is there any way to contact Gorath before Earth reacts? Another delegate called out desperately from the floor. Can we force him to return the children before a fleet arrives? Gorath has jammed all incoming diplomatic channels, believing he is controlling the timeline, Bale replied, his feathers drooping with sorrow. He thinks he is sitting in a fortress, waiting for a surrender. He does not realize he has just turned his entire planet into a target. May the ancestors preserve us, Kale muttered, clutching the edge of the podium as panic began to break out across the council floor. What will the human government do now? Bale looked out over the chaotic assembly, his voice dropping into a solemn, heavy cadence. Inform the Earth ambassador that the Galactic Assembly condemns the Vorik Syndicate's actions in the strongest possible terms. And pray that whatever gods Gorath worships have mercy on his soul, because the humans will bring none. Deep within the jagged obsidian mountains of Vorik Prime, the iron stronghold hummed with industrial power. The fortress was a masterpiece of mercenary defense, carved directly into a granite cliff face and protected by 3 overlapping energy shields, automated plasma turrets, and 10,000 heavily armed Vorik mercenaries. The air inside the subterranean complex was thick with the ozone stench of heavy generators and the warm metallic tang of hydraulic fluid. It was a fortress built to withstand an orbital siege from any regional fleet, designed by warlords who measured power purely in tonnage, shields, and firepower. In the central command deck, Warlord Gorath sat on his massive iron throne, his 8-foot-tall reptilian frame clad in heavy, polished power armor. His thick, scaly tail flicked with arrogant satisfaction as he stared at a high-definition holographic projection floating in the center of the room. The display showed 42 small human children gathered inside a reinforced containment bay on the lower levels. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 12, were huddled together on the cold metal floor plates, clearly frightened, but several of the older ones were quietly whispering to the younger ones, keeping them remarkably calm. Look at them, Gorath chuckled, his deep, raspy voice echoing off the reinforced bulkheads. Fragile, soft-skinned little creatures. The United Earth Fleet will willingly surrender 3 whole star systems in Sector 9 just to get these precious little assets back unharmed. Standing nearby in heavy shock cuffs was Captain Tarek, an alien merchant officer whose commercial vessel had been captured alongside the human transport ship during the raid. Tarek looked at the holographic display, then turned his gaze up toward the giant reptilian warlord, his expression a mixture of profound pity and absolute, mounting terror. Gorath, Tarek said quietly, his raspy voice trembling from smoke inhalation and fear. I beg you, while you still have a fleeting moment of time, release those children immediately. Load them onto an automated shuttle and send them straight back to the nearest human outpost. Gorath turned his reptilian head, his glowing yellow eyes narrowing as he glared down at the bound captive. Release my leverage? Why on earth should I abandon the single greatest bargaining asset I have ever acquired? The human fleet will be crawling on its knees, bowing to my exact demands within 24 hours. You do not understand what you have done, Tarek pleaded, taking a step forward despite the hum of his energy bindings. You think you are dealing with a standard galactic power. You think humanity operates according to cool, calculating political logic. You are foolishly measuring them by the cozy, diplomatic standards of the Galactic Assembly. Humanity is a young, undisciplined species, Gorath spat, crossing his thick, armored arms over his chest plates. They bleed, they feel pain, and they love their offspring to a fault. That emotional love makes them pathetic and weak. It makes them entirely vulnerable to simple coercion. No, Tarek shouted, his voice cracking with desperate urgency. That love is precisely what makes them terrifying. Every ancient species in the galaxy learned this the hard way during the First Rim War. When you fight humans for land, they use clever tactics and military math. When you fight humans for trade routes, they calculate profits and cut their losses. But when you threaten their young, you bypass every shred of their logic. You activate a primitive, ruthless predator instinct that humanity spent 10,000 years trying to bury. Gorath sneered, turning his back on the prisoner to adjust the primary tactical display console. Let them come. My energy shields are completely impenetrable. My automated turrets can vaporize an orbital drop pod long before it hits the upper atmosphere. If a single human warship enters this system, I will broadcast the children's cries across all subspace frequencies to instantly force their fleet to stand down and comply. Tarek slowly shook his head, dropping his hopeless gaze to the cold iron floor plates. They will not broadcast back to you, Gorath. They will not send a fleet with political demands or formal letters of protest. You did not capture helpless hostages. You just gave 80 billion human beings a single, unified purpose. Before Gorath could issue another arrogant insult, the secondary tactical officer at the long-range radar console let out a sharp, panicked bark of confusion. Warlord, long-range orbital sensors have just registered an unexpected anomaly in the upper atmosphere. Gorath swung around, his yellow eyes zooming in on the main tactical screen. A human strike fleet? How many dreadnoughts have dropped out of hyperspace? None, sir, the technician stammered, his claws flying frantically across his flickering control interface. There are no capital ships logged on radar, but our atmospheric density sensors just registered 48 high-altitude stealth signatures dropping through the cloud layer directly above Sector 7. Gorath frowned, stepping down from his throne with heavy, echoing strides. Stealth drops? Without orbital fleet cover or artillery support? Send patrol squads Alpha and Beta to intercept them immediately. Wipe them out before they reach the ridge. Sir, the technician whispered, his voice trembling violently as he stared at the readout. Patrol Squad Alpha is not responding to our radio pings. Their biomonitors just went offline. All 30 guards in under 2 seconds. Gorath's sneer faded slightly as a heavy, unnatural silence settled over the command deck. Outside the high-tech fortress, the sun began to set behind the jagged obsidian mountains, plunging the iron stronghold into total darkness. Night fell fast over the jagged obsidian peaks of Vorik Prime, painting the landscape in shades of bruised purple and pitch black. The sky above the iron stronghold was normally filled with the noisy, rhythmic patrol patterns of heavily armored gunships and long-range sensor drones. But as the planet's twin moons reached their zenith, an unsettling, absolute quiet blanketed the entire outer perimeter. The usual chatter of patrol teams over the tactical network had withered down to a strange, hollow static that made the veteran mercenaries shift uncomfortably in their armor. On the eastern ridge, precisely 3 kilometers from the main fortress gate, a Vorik sniper squad sat inside an insulated watch bunker embedded deep within the mountain face. Sergeant Krell, a scarred veteran of a dozen bloody mercenary campaigns across the fringe, adjusted his high-resolution night vision visor and scanned the deep canyon below. The chill of the mountain air seeped through the bunker's firing slits, but it was the silence outside that truly disturbed him. Command keeps demanding status updates every 5 minutes, the spotter beside him grumbled, tapping his claw against the flickering console interface. What do they honestly expect us to see out here? The human fleet hasn't even entered the star system yet, and sensor telemetry shows 0 warp signatures. Command is twitchy because of those human kids down in Bay 4, Krell replied, adjusting the fine focus wheel on his thermal scope. Word circulating among the elite guards is that the warlord expects human ambassadors to arrive by tomorrow morning, crawling on their knees with a formal treaty. They should have stayed on their ships and taken the mineral ore, the spotter muttered under his breath, shaking his scaly head. taking helpless young. It leaves a terrible taste in my mouth, even for mercenaries like us who fight for coin. Shut your maw and keep your eyes on the canyon pass, Krell snapped, though his own claws tightened nervously around the grip of his rifle. He leaned back into his scope, fixing his crosshairs on the narrow mountain trail leading up from the valley floor. Suddenly, his thermal optic array flickered wildly. The bright, reassuring orange heat signatures of the rocks and canyon floor below vanished, replaced by an unnatural, uniform blackness that swallowed the landscape whole. Krell frowned, slamming his palm against the side of his heavy helmet to clear the display. Sensor glitch. The optic array is freezing up again. Sergeant, the spotter whispered, his voice no longer grumbling, but trembling with a sudden, icy fear. Look at the main grid monitor right now. Krell turned his head to look at the primary tactical display bolted to the bunker wall. The green status lights representing their outer defense grid were going out one by one. They weren't flickering in erratic bursts like a power failure. They were fading in a precise, geometric line moving toward the fortress at 20 kilometers per hour. Outpost 12 went completely dark. 3 seconds later, Outpost 11 dropped offline. Outpost 10 followed instantly without a single millisecond of delay. No alarm sirens sounded. No frantic distress calls were logged over the net. The perimeter guards weren't retreating or calling for backup. They were simply ceasing to exist on the network. Raise the general alarm right now, Krell yelled, lunging across the bunker floor for the primary emergency communication toggle on the main console. He slammed his heavy claw down on the red receiver switch, desperate to broadcast a warning to the command deck. Nothing happened. The communication channel was completely dead, producing only a flat, cold static hiss that mocked his panic. Before Krell could unholster his plasma sidearm, the reinforced steel blast door of the sniper bunker groaned under immense pressure. The thick hinges didn't detonate with a loud explosion. They silently dissolved in a shower of brilliant, white-hot chemical sparks as a high-density thermite cutter sliced through the locking mechanisms in 4 seconds flat. The heavy door was pushed inward, hitting the concrete floor plates with a dull, heavy thud that kicked up a cloud of dust. 3 tall, shadowed figures stepped into the dim interior of the bunker. They wore no bright rank insignias, no glowing force fields, and no loud-powered armor. They were clad in matte black, light-absorbent composite suits that seemed to actively suck the surrounding light into themselves. Their visors were pale, lifeless gray plates that reflected nothing. Krell raised his plasma rifle, but before his finger could compress the trigger, a suppressed, high-velocity kinetic round struck his weapon's power cell with surgical precision, shattering the rifle without detonating the volatile plasma within. In the exact same fraction of a second human operator stepped forward, driving a specialized combat blade cleanly through the spotter's neck joint, dropping the creature instantly to the floor plates without a sound. Krell fell back against the concrete wall, clutching his ruined, bleeding hand, staring up at the leader of the human squad in absolute terror. The operator didn't shout interrogation questions at him. He didn't offer a dramatic speech about vengeance or justice. The team leader simply raised a handheld scanner, verified Krell's biosignature against a digital hit list, and checked a wrist-mounted tactical pad displaying a detailed architectural layout of the stronghold. Outpost 9 clear, the human operator reported into his internal, bone conduction comms. His voice was utterly flat, completely devoid of anger, adrenaline, or fear. It was the calm, routine tone of a professional completing a daily checklist. Initiate blackout phase 2 immediately. Krell stared at the matte black visor, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps as he backed further into the corner. Who sent you? Did Earth Fleet Command order this strike? The human operator paused for a brief second, looking down at the trembling mercenary before raising his suppressed sidearm. No, the mothers. Inside the central command deck of the Iron Stronghold, the remaining atmosphere had degraded from arrogant confidence to claustrophobic panic. Warlord Gorath stood over his main tactical console, pounding his heavy reptilian fist against the steel frame until the monitors flickered. Half of the holographic map showing Vorik Prime's northern hemisphere was now covered in dead zones. "Where are the gunships?" Gorath roared, his yellow eyes bulging with fury as he glared at his subordinate. "Why aren't the automated perimeter defenses firing on these intruders?" "Sir, the automated defense grid has been completely bypassed from the inside," his tactical officer shrieked, his claws flying frantically across his control interface. Someone uploaded a localized electromagnetic virus through the sub-level maintenance nodes. All 40 orbital defense cannons are offline, and our internal automated turrets are freezing up. "How many ships dropped into orbit?" Gorath demanded, stepping forward to grab the technician by his neck collar, hoisting him several inches off the floor. "Tell me the size of their fleet right now." "There are no ships in orbit, Warlord," the officer sobbed in sheer terror, kicking his legs uselessly in the air. "Sensors show 0 capital vessels. It is ground units. They landed via high-altitude stealth gliders 3 hours ago. They have been crawling up the mountain under complete radio silence." Standing in the corner of the room, Captain Tarek let out a long, shuddering breath, shaking his bound head. "I told you, Gorath. They did not bring a fleet to fight your armies. They brought specialists to slaughter your guards." "Silence," Gorath spat, throwing the technician back into his seat with enough force to crack the console. He unholstered his massive plasma cannon, charging the cell with a loud, rising whine. "Command guard, fall back to the central corridor. Lock down Bay 4. If any human breaches the inner perimeter, execute the children immediately." 200 of Gorath's most elite, heavily armored Vorik veterans moved into defensive positions outside the containment bay. They deployed heavy blast shields, mounted heavy repeater plasma turrets, and braced themselves behind 3-foot-thick steel barricades. They were hardened mercenaries who had survived dozens of planetary sieges across the fringe, trained to hold narrow bottlenecks against overwhelming odds. The corridor leading directly to Bay 4 was a narrow, 200-meter kill zone. There was no natural cover, no alternate flanking routes, and 0 blind spots for an incoming force to utilize. "Hold the line," the mercenary commander bellowed through his helmet speaker, locking his boots to the floor plates. "Nothing gets through this corridor alive." For 2 long, suffocating minutes, nothing happened. The thick gray smoke from the failing air scrubbers drifted slowly down the hallway. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of charged plasma weapons. Then, the ceiling ventilation grates directly above the barricade did not fall. They were sliced cleanly from their steel frames. 4 canister-like devices dropped silently into the center of the mercenary line. It was not tear gas or standard visual smoke. It was high-density sensor blind fog, engineered specifically to scatter thermal imaging, laser tracking, and radio frequencies simultaneously. Before the Vorik mercenaries could fire blind into the cloud, the heavy blast doors at the far end of the hallway were blown off their hydraulic hinges by a concentrated breacher charge. Human Special Forces, the legendary Ghost Battalions, moved into the kill zone. They did not charge forward with heroic battle cries or loud, sweeping plasma fire. They moved in a low, tight, interlocking fireteam formation, advancing at a steady, rhythmic walk through the obscuring fog. Their suppressed kinetic rifles fired in precise, 3-round bursts. Every single round found an armor gap, neck joints, visor seams, and power pack conduits. The battle for the kill zone was not a glorious contest of physical strength. It was a cold, industrial execution of defensive positions. The Vorik mercenaries fired wildly into the fog, their bright blue plasma bolts scorching the reinforced walls, but the human teams used the smoke to systematically flank the heavy barricades. When a heavy repeater turret swung frantically toward them, a human operator simply dropped a magnetic grenade onto its base, disabling the mount before moving forward without missing a single beat. In less than 4 minutes, the 200 elite guards protecting the approach to the Iron Stronghold's inner sanctum were lying broken and silent on the metal floor plates. The leader of the human assault team, Captain Vance stepped over the wreckage of a heavy blast shield, his black armor coated in a light dusting of gray powder. He raised his gloved hand, signaling his team to hold position outside the final titanium doors of Bay 4. Vance reached down to his belt, pulling a small, soft item from his tactical pouch, a pink, stuffed fabric toy that had been dropped on the civilian transport during the initial pirate raid. He tucked it carefully under his arm, turned toward the heavy lock mechanism, and pulled out his primary breaching charges. Inside the central command deck, Warlord Gorath was breathing heavily, his reptilian chest heaving as he watched his final security monitors go dark one by one. The Iron Stronghold, a fortress that had successfully withstood orbital bombardments for 3 decades, had been completely dismantled in less than 4 hours by a squad of human specialists. The heavy steel blast doors of the command deck groaned under intense heat. A bright red line traced its way around the reinforced frame as thermite charges ate through the 4-inch titanium plating in seconds. Gorath backed up toward his iron throne, his massive plasma cannon raised and pointed firmly at the melting doorway. His remaining 6 command guards stood beside him, their heavy weapons trembling violently in their scaly grip. "Stay back," Gorath screamed, his raspy voice cracking with unadulterated fear. "I have the manual detonation codes for the entire sub-level. If you breach this room, I will blow the containment bay and everyone in it to ash." The blast doors collapsed inward with a heavy, metallic crash, filling the room with swirling gray smoke. Captain Vance stepped through the dust, flanked by 4 operators clad in dark, matte black armor. None of them raised their weapons to aim directly at Gorath's head. They didn't need to. Every entry point to the command deck, including the ceiling ventilation conduits and secondary maintenance hatches, was already occupied by human operators with suppressed rifles locked onto every guard in the room. Vance did not shout or issue cinematic threats. He slowly removed his helmet, revealing a battle-hardened man in his late 30s with cold, gray eyes and a faint scar running down his left cheek. He looked at Gorath not with hatred or rage, but with a terrifying, absolute detachment. "Your detonation codes were wiped 12 minutes ago when my team took your secondary server room," Vance said, his voice quiet and perfectly steady. "Your sub-level charges are completely disarmed. Your perimeter is gone. Your mercenaries are dead or fled." Gorath's yellow eyes darted frantically around the room, looking for any avenue of escape, any leverage he could possibly cling to. I am Warlord Gorath of the Vorik Syndicate. I am a recognized sovereign power in Sector 9. You cannot execute me without a formal Galactic Assembly trial." Vance reached into his tactical pouch and pulled out a small communications tablet, tapping the glass screen once. He held the device up toward the kneeling warlord. On the screen was High Ambassador Vale of the Galactic Assembly, standing in the middle of the council chamber alongside 3,000 silent planetary delegates. "Warlord Gorath," Ambassador Vale said through the speaker, his avian voice cold and utterly lacking its usual diplomatic warmth. 4 hours ago, you committed an act that violates the fundamental instinct of every sapient species in this galaxy. You were warned by every representative in this council. Ambassador, Gorath pleaded, taking a desperate step toward the screen. "Intervene. Demand that they stand down. They are violating fundamental interstellar law." Vale slowly closed his eyes, his feathery crest flattening against his head. "There is no law in Sector 9, Gorath. And even if there were, humanity did not ask the Assembly for authorization tonight. They simply informed us that they were retrieving their children. The Galactic Assembly recognizes no sovereign rights for child traffickers. May your gods forgive you." The transmission cut instantly to black, leaving the command deck in suffocating silence. Gorath dropped his heavy plasma cannon, the weapon clattering uselessly against the metal floor plates. He fell to his knees, raising his clawed hands high above his head in complete, desperate surrender. "Take me into custody," he rasped, his voice trembling. "I surrender my fortress. I surrender my territory." Captain Vance didn't pull out handcuffs or scan his biodata for processing. He walked slowly past the kneeling warlord, stepping toward the secondary elevator shaft that led straight down to the containment bays. "We don't take prisoners on child retrieval missions," Vance said quietly over his shoulder to his second-in-command. "Clean the deck." As Vance stepped into the elevator shaft, the suppressed pops of kinetic sidearms echoed through the command deck behind him, putting a silent, definitive end to the Vorik Syndicate. The morning sun broke over the jagged obsidian peaks of Vorik Prime, casting a warm, golden light across the landing field outside the Iron Stronghold. The acrid smell of ozone and burnt metal still lingered in the air, but the terrifying violence of the night had vanished, replaced by an atmosphere of disciplined, quiet order. 3 heavy human medical transports sat parked on the primary flight deck, their rear loading ramps lowered to the metal ground. The 42 human children were being guided up the ramps by gentle, unarmed medical personnel wrapped in soft blankets. The children were safe, unharmed, and smiling as they were offered warm drinks and stuffed toys. The older kids walked alongside the younger ones, keeping their promise to protect them until they were back in human space. Captain Vance stood near the foot of the lead transport's ramp, watching the last of the children board the ship. A 6-year-old girl with blonde pigtails paused at the top of the ramp, holding the pink stuffed fabric toy Vance had retrieved from the containment bay. She looked back at the armored captain, gave a small, shy wave, and stepped inside the warm, brightly lit cabin. Vance allowed a faint, rare smile to touch his weathered face before placing his helmet back under his arm. He turned to see Captain Tarek, the alien merchant officer who had been rescued from the command deck, sitting on a supply crate nearby, sipping water from a steel canteen. Standing beside Tarek was High Ambassador Vale, who had arrived via an emergency diplomatic shuttle alongside a small delegation of Galactic Assembly officials. The ancient avian ambassador walked slowly toward Captain Vance, his iridescent blue feathers rustling softly in the mountain breeze as he looked at the human warrior with a mixture of profound respect and lingering, instinctual dread. "The children are entirely unharmed?" Vale asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern. "All 42 are secure, accounted for, and undergoing preliminary medical checks," Vance replied, his tone calm and professional. "Physical injuries are 0. Psychological trauma will be treated by specialists once we enter Earth orbit." Vale looked past Vance toward the smoking ruins of the Iron Stronghold. 10,000 heavily armed mercenaries had been neutralized, a mountain fortress dismantled, and an entire regional syndicate erased from interstellar charts in less than 6 hours. All without a single capital warship firing a shot from orbit. The entire galaxy watched this operation unfold tonight, Captain, Vale said softly, his dark eyes meeting Vance's gray gaze. Species across 3 sectors who once eyed human border colonies with ambition. Species who foolishly assumed humanity was weak because you preferred trade and diplomacy. They have all witnessed what happened here today. "Good," Vance said simply, adjusting the strap of his sidearm. "Then they learned an important lesson without us having to demonstrate it twice." 2 days later, the Galactic Assembly convened in an extraordinary session at the Citadel. The Grand Hall was packed to capacity, with representatives from thousands of star systems attending in person or via holographic feed. By an absolute, unanimous vote of 3,000 planetary delegations, the High Council drafted an immediate, permanent amendment to the Galactic Charter. It was not a complex treaty filled with legal loopholes, trade exemptions, or bureaucratic compromises. It was a single, stark decree codified into universal interstellar law. Greater than Galactic Charter Directive 990. Greater than no nation, empire, syndicate, or individual shall target, capture, or harm the juvenile offspring of the human species under any circumstances. Greater than violation of this directive constitutes an immediate, non-negotiable forfeit of all sovereign protections, diplomatic immunity, and territorial rights under galactic law. Greater than. Across the galaxy, from the core worlds to the lawless fringe of Sector 9, pirates, warlords, and grand admirals read the new directive in quiet, solemn silence. They had seen the wreckage of the Iron Stronghold. They had witnessed the terrifying precision of what happened when humanity's deepest biological instinct was unlocked. And for the next 1,000 years, no one ever laid a finger on a human child again.